Welcome to the Creating High Performance Athletes podcast. I'm your host, Olympian Jonathan Edwards. Let's get started. Hey everybody, Jonathan here, and it is another Wednesday Facebook Live. So everybody who's listening on iTunes, welcome. If you haven't caught us on in our Facebook group at Raising High Performing Athletes with me, I look forward to seeing you over there. And I'm going to start messing around a little bit because I might be posting this, start doing this more on my main Facebook page and then sharing it into this group, which is kind of cool. So if you've if that's kind of your thing, because that way I get a little bit more reach right now, but I want to get more people into this group. And I also got a question. So I first titled this group Raising High Performing Athletes. But one of the things that I'm finding is that there's kind of an audience that worries about their athletes and their athletes who have kind of anxiety, quote unquote. And you know how I feel about the word anxiety. I feel like we're kind of painting athletes with a broad brush, and that's not really what we should be doing. But I'm considering changing the name of this group from Raising High Performing Athletes to the Anxiety-Free Athlete. Part of that is just kind of how Facebook works and seeing if I can reach more people. But I'm just curious if that would resonate with people more. So if that would resonate with you, just leave me a little thumbs up or a little comment. Like, yeah, if we titled this group like the Anxiety-Free Athlete, or do you like the name Raising High Performing Athletes? Because the topics that I'm going to cover are the same in both, pretty much under those same titles, but because raising a high-performing athlete and raising an anxiety-free athlete are the same thing. So if you like the idea of shifting this name, let me know. But Becky Jones, hello. Brian LaRue, hello. Josh Krogman, welcome. Okay, so we're gonna get started here real quick. I go way too long with my Facebook group. That's my other Facebook group before this, so I always get in here a little bit late. But I wanted to talk today about the idea of how everything is possible with progression. So a lot of questions I get, are like, oh, what drill should I do? Or, is my athlete gonna be able to play in college? Or, our coach recommended this, but my athlete gets nervous, and so the question is like, well, what should what should we do? And so my answer is always like, everything is possible with progression. So I had a strength coach who taught me once. He said, listen, if I put a 10-pound weight on your foot, so there's no problem. So if I put a 10-pound weight on your foot, no problem. But if I drop that weight on your foot, that's a problem, right? So, and that's true, right? The 10-pound weight by itself is not a problem, right? But the 10-pound weight, if I drop it on your foot, well, that's now a problem, right? So this kind of when people ask me like, oh, should my son or daughter, should they weight train? Or someone says, oh, weight training is bad for a kid who's under the age of whatever. I've heard it from under 10 to under 18. I've heard people say like, oh, using weights is bad for my athlete. That's not true. It's just how you apply that, because a load is a load is a load. That's what I like to say. In strength and conditioning, we say that a lot. A load is a load is a load. How you apply it is where the problem is either good, it's either a good problem or it's a bad problem, right? So, Rich Kabatic, hello, sir. Where you been? Thanks for joining us. So, when it comes to progression, I like to tell the story. The first time I ever saw the sport of luge, right? So, some of you know I was an Olympian in the rather complicated sport of luge, which over in Europe is like softball. It's like everybody, in Germany, everybody knows what luge is, but in the United States, not so much. And so my first trip to Lake Placid, I remember going up to Mount Van Hovenberg with my mom, and then walking from the parking lot all the way up to the track. And so there's two tracks. There was a bobsled run, and you had to walk past that up to the luge run, and you could hear the sleds coming down. It was super cool. And this is my first ever trip there, right? And so a sled had come down from the men's start, which is the very top of the track, right? That's where the men go, only the men go. The women don't go from there. It's like too dangerous, too crazy. And on that track in particular, it was really crazy. So we walked up and we got up to the track and we got up to curve 10, and I heard a sled coming down from the men's start. And this sled comes down, and I had never heard a sled, but it just sounded super cool. Like as they go through the curves, like and then you hear it go down through the smaller curves, and then it's like, and then through the big curves, like, and so we were standing at the end of the labyrinth, and so there's 3 curves in the labyrinth, little curves, but that's where a lot of trouble can happen. That's what I learned. Because here comes the first sled I ever saw, comes down through the labyrinth. We're hearing all this noise, this crazy noise, and he goes into curve 10. Curve 10 was like this big left-hand turn, big up-down. And this guy was like on his side, and he went straight to the woods. And the woods is like the lip at the top that keeps the sleds in. And he went right up, boom, and came back down, and then slid out of view. And all you hear is over the announcer, you hear like 81 in curve 10. And 81 was code for crash. And then 82 was we need an ambulance. So that was the next call. It was like 82 in curve 13, because the athlete had slid down and stopped in curve 13, but this athlete had demoed himself. This is the first luge athlete I ever saw. And so I got real nervous, right? I'm a young athlete. This is my first time to the track. I'm with my mom. I'd seen the sleds on TV, but now this was live, and the first sled I see come down just blows up. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I got to do that? And so I went to the coach, who a little bit later, I did see another sled come down, and that was cool. And I went to my coach, and I said, his name was Lynn, and I said, Lynn, do we do that? And she goes, no. You're going to start at curve 10. So when you learn how to do luge, you don't jump right to the top of the track. You start really low, where it's slow, and you're learning how the ice feels, and you learn how the sled moves. And sure enough, I did that, and it was great. It was awesome. And then as you got good at it, as you got comfortable with the speed and the feeling of the ice and how to move your sled, then you would move up to, let's say, curve 11. Curve 9, and then curve 8. And you move further up the track as you were comfortable. So that was where I learned really, really quickly about progression. And so for a lot of my parents who follow me in this group, who listen to our podcast, they have an athlete who is coming along, but then they might get a little nervous. They might get a little, anxious, which I can't stand the word, but then they get derailed. And so the question is like, well, what do you do in that case? Your athlete was going along okay, but then, what do you do? Well, you have to move them down the track. So that's what we would do in luge. It's like we would move up the track as we felt comfortable and confident, but if we had some bad runs or maybe the speed was too much, we would move back down until our brain would get comfortable with it. And then once we were there, then we were comfortable, then we could move further up the track now and experience more speed, with the goal of getting to our start, right? So as a junior, our start was the junior start. Crazy name, I know, but that was all done through progression. Now, for a lot of my athletes, I work with a lot of goalies in a variety of sports, right? It's a lot of lacrosse, a lot of hockey, and so what can happen sometimes is, as a goalie, they have to move up, right? Or let's say your athlete, they're not a goalie, but they get called up to play with a better team. Maybe it's older kids, so they're bigger, faster, stronger, and your athlete now is having a little bit of butterflies over that, that's okay, as long as it's not too big of a jump, right? So in the whole world of long-term athlete development, and I wrote about this in my book, in An Athlete's Guide to Winning in Sports and Life, which is on Amazon. I highly recommend you getting a copy. But I talk about, long-term athlete development. There's a concept in long-term athlete development, is that no matter what age your athlete is at, they should have competitions where they win easily, and then they should have competitions where they lose, right? And then for the majority of their competitions will be evenly matched, right? And in team sports, sometimes this doesn't always work out in terms of like the score. Like you might have a lopsided score. It might be 14-0 because your team lacks, scorers. But overall, in the general consensus of the game, it was pretty evenly matched physical game. Right, what we want our athletes to do is we want to be moving them up this ladder of progression, but then just to experience things as long as they're safe, and then to move them maybe back down to where they were, but sometimes to move them even lower, right? Because it's really good for the confidence. Why? What happens is the pace of play slows down, right? And so when the pace of play slows down, the processing that the brain has to do for the athlete is is lessened. And so one of the things I want to share with you in this audio is about brainwaves, and I've talked about this in other videos before, but this group may not have heard me talk about this. So brainwaves is just the frequency that your brain operates at, and so I want you to understand this. When we're going through kind of our everyday, kind of doing this sort of stuff, we're in beta, right? It's called beta brainwaves. Okay. When we're driving along in our car and we're not really paying attention and we're just kind of, you're driving the same route to work sort of thing, you're in beta, right? Sometimes, though, you can actually dip into alpha, which is kind of weird. Alpha is a slower state, and that's where we can visualize and that people can go into meditations and things like that. So we can dip into alpha. There's also theta, which is when we're dreaming at night. And then there's delta, which is very deep sleep. Okay. Now, another thing to understand. Hey there, William Gatling. Welcome. Thanks for joining. I got you right in here. One of the things I want you to understand about brainwaves for your athlete is that if they are comfortable, right? If they're not overwhelmed, but they're not also underwhelmed, right? They're in beta, and that's a good time to learn. We can learn when we're in beta. The problem is that when we trigger an athlete into what's called high beta brainwaves, right? That's when we have this basically this response like the house is on fire, got to get out, or a car's about to run me down the road, or there's a lion coming to attack me. That's high beta. What happens in high beta is there's not really any learning because an athlete's focus is on number one, it's on their body, right? Am I safe? Am I going to get eaten? Right? It's on their environment. What's around me that's going to hurt me? Right? And then it's on time. Like, holy smokes, when can I get out of here, sort of thing. So if your athlete is in a situation like that, then they're not really learning, right? Now you can put an athlete in a situation like that a little bit where they have to play up, right? And they're going to be a little stressed out. They're going to be in that high beta, but their body is actually ready. Like their brain is actually helping their body be more prepared, okay? And so when they're more prepared, what happens is then they can execute these skills that maybe they were a difficulty before, right? So let's say they're, for our goalies, our goalie has to play up. They're playing up another age group, or they're playing in a more complex situation. And now the pucks, the balls are coming faster than ever. Well, if they're in high beta, they're actually really ready for that. They're actually ready for that experience. Now, it's not necessarily a learning experience until later, right? So they go into that situation, they're in high beta, they're all fast and twitchy, and they're making all the saves they need to make. They're performing really well because they just can react. Now, if an athlete is in a more sensitive sport, let's say like archery or shooting, or where there's things where there needs to be a little bit more flow, a little bit more touch, that might not be a good situation for them. They need to be more in that beta wave, right? But with progression, what we're doing is we're moving an athlete up the ladder, not just physically, but also mentally. And so we want to take that into consideration. I get emails probably once a week from my clients, from just random people who follow me, who go like, listen, my athlete has been asked to play up. Should they go? And so my first question is like, well, will they be safe physically? Right? If your goalie, or if your athlete in general is undersized, just this last week, I had a client who they have an athlete who is very technically good for her sport, but she's kind of small. She hasn't really had a growth spurt yet. And there was a request for her to play up, and technically she was going to be just fine, but physically there was a high potential for injury, and I recommended maybe this wasn't the best time to do that now. It didn't really, because if your athlete's good, they're going to get plenty of opportunities to play. They're going to get plenty of requests to play, and that can be you don't always need that, right? So, but if your athlete is it's not going to be too big of a jump, then sometimes putting them into that more stressful situation will help them. Now, to just kind of share with you another Olympic experience I had, there were times when we would go to a new track, a new venue, and it was a lot faster, a lot more technically difficult than what we had been used to. But we had to get to a certain start height to race. And so there was all this pressure to, like, I need to move up the track, I need to move up the track. But if I wasn't having good runs, I could move up the track and I could get down, but it wouldn't be very clean and you wouldn't have a fast time. So sometimes it was better to just kind of just to do what you could and not try to race, to have that, maintain that good experience, right? So let me say that again. Sometimes we could put an athlete in a situation where they can play up, but they're going to have such a bad experience that it's going to stick with them mentally, and that's not going to help them, right? It's going to dwell on them. I had that happen with my own son this last year. So he plays soccer, and we're playing indoor soccer, which is basically like in a hockey rink, with turf on the floor. But he started playing goalie, and it wasn't my first choice because I'm not a huge fan of indoor soccer for goalies. I think it's kind of hard. But he played, and we got absolutely shelled. Lost like 12-1. I think it was his second game. I had to spend a lot of time with him to physically and mentally and emotionally keep him up and explain to him like why. Now he knows Dad's, I do this for a living. He could buy into that, and it was an easy transition. But he realized like, wow, that was a big jump. I really didn't need that right now. But he's strong enough to survive it. So if your athlete is mentally strong enough to survive a really taxing situation, they might be okay as long as they don't get injured, right? So in terms of progression, again, you want to have your athlete experiencing these wins and these losses and these easy wins, right? It's where their brain can process it all and they can have fun, and now they can kind of get to another level. They can, it's not flow in this particular case because the pace is so slow, but they're just enjoying it and they're just having fun. And you can see this at the highest level of sport. You can see it in, let's say, NBA basketball, right? I'm a fan of athletes, so I will watch basketball to enjoy. And one of the things you see sometimes in the regular season, you'll have a really good team play a really bad team, and sometimes it's just ugly, and it's just ugly basketball. It's just ugly game. But sometimes you can see it where that good team is just feeling it, like they're slinging the ball around and they're having a great time and they're draining shots they didn't normally drain, but that they now are tapping into that experience because in the overall scheme of progression, they got a chance to play a weaker team, and so now that better team is touched into a feeling that they might not have gotten if they're always in a grind. Okay? So if your athlete is always in a grind situation where they're just like, it's like, oh, another one. We're gonna get shelled today. Like, this is gonna be horrible. You gotta have some experiences when they're doing something that's a little less demanding. Now, here's the thing about progression, is that some athletes, you don't have a choice. You are in a situation, you are grinding it out, you are playing, like you're committed, and you're just going, but the overall experience is weighing you down. That's when you need to have some sort of alternative activity that is going to basically replicate that easy performance, but it's going to give you a break. So a number of years ago, I got a chance to work with some tennis athletes, and I had the girls in the weight room, and we had a bit of a break, and so we were just kind of chatting, and one of the girls, kind of as the other girls cleared out, one of the girls came to me and just said, hey, listen, and she was one of the better girls in this program, and she was like, I'm exhausted. And I was like, well, wait a second, you're like 14. Do you even know what exhausted means? And so she goes, well, here's what I'm feeling. And she explained to me that every day her coaches put her in a situation where she was supposed to compete at her best every single day. And if she didn't, her coach would get on her. And so we talked. We actually talked through lunch, so she missed lunch. But this was really cool because if your athlete is motivated, they're usually thinking a little bit about how they, what they're feeling. They're thinking about but not just how they're feeling negatively, how they're thinking, how they want to be positively, right? So she wasn't just unloading on me that she was just worn out and exhausted. she was just like, no, this is what's going on. And my coach is asking me every day to do this. And there's some days when I just don't have that. And that's true, right? Your athlete, we're not machines, right? So I recommended, I talked to her mom, and it was great because her mom, I was new to this experience, by the way, this program. And so I had just been brought in for a weekend to do a strength and conditioning program. And the mom, though, after the first day, the daughter had gone home and said she really enjoyed the way I spoke. And so the mom encouraged her to talk to me because maybe I would just give her a second opinion. And what was really cool was that the mom later came up and she was super excited because her daughter had spoken with me. And her daughter was smiling for the first time in a long time. And part of it was just being aware of saying, like, listen, you you need to have some sort of break. So progression like can only happen so much, and we need to have what's called super compensation. So you're training, you're basically wearing the body down mentally, emotionally, physically. You need to take some sort of break so that the body comes back up, and we have what's called super compensation, and that we come over, we're better than we were before. So your athletes, and as parents, I've got a lot of parents who listen to me. As parents, when your kid is grumpy, your kid is tired, if they're not eating well. If your kid, all they want to do is eat like Doritos every day, right? Part of that is just like they're just worn out. So go break it up, do something fun. Take them to like a trampoline facility for an afternoon. Maybe talk to their coach and say, "Hey, listen, can we break this up a little bit?" Because sometimes that's when breakthroughs happen. Is when you break it up, breakthroughs happen, right? So I want you to make sure that you're doing that for your athlete as well. Because I believe that everything is possible with progression. Yet sometimes we forget this, right? So if you go into the weight room every day and all you do is you lift a 10-pound weight over and over and over and over and over again, you're not improving, right? You have to basically work in these little cycles. Today it's a 10-pound weight, tomorrow it's a 12-pound weight, then maybe it's a 15-pound weight. But wait, maybe the 15 pounds is too heavy now. Great. You drop back down to the 12, or maybe you do a 13 and a half, right? And then what happens? You take a little deload week, you come back, now you try to lift that 15-pound weight again. And now you can do it, right? So that's progression. But progression doesn't happen in a straight line, right? And it doesn't happen exponentially either, right? In terms of athletics, it's rare we have exponential growth, right? What we do have, especially with young athletes, is that they have really good growth and then they plateau. And then they get frustrated because they're not having the same pace of growth that they had before, right? So if we're progressing though, if we're giving our athlete challenges and along the way, and also games and experiences that are in their wheelhouse, that are not too complicated but not too uncomplicated, right? That they're just kind of they're learning. But then you're going to give them a game every once in a while where they're going to roll over the other team. Or as an athlete, they're just going to win a competition hands down, right? And that's cool. You need to have that as well. So everything is possible with progression. If you find that your athlete has stalled, then you need to move, to use my luge example, you got to move them down the track. You got to back off. I have a client who's an entrepreneur. I don't coach him on athletics. I coach him on anxiety and depression and high performance in terms of work. And what floors me is that he expects every day to go be able to perform, but he never builds in any downtime. And so you got to build in downtime, or else your body will find a way to rest, and that usually happens in injury. It usually happens in sickness. It can be, or it happens in something like a chronic ailment, that like a cancer or something along those lines, right? So you got to have progression, okay? So listen, everything's possible with progression. If your athlete is struggling, back them down the track a bit, right? Take them back to a point where they can feel like they're winning again, and then reload it. If your athlete is in a situation where, hey, that's a good idea, but they can't, right? Like let's say they're on a team and the team's horrible, but they're responsible for doing all sorts of work and they're getting frustrated because they're not winning. That's when you got to find a way to track their results independent of their ultimate score. Okay, so independent of the team. independent of the overall. You have to look at how are they doing in a section of the track or a section of that what it is they're doing. For my goalies, I always recommend get away from scoreboard watching and more at save percentage monitoring. And then within save percentage, you can also then monitor all these other stuff. As an Olympian, we would get to the end of the track, we would get a time. Oh, your time was 50 seconds. Well, I just went a mile. What happened in that mile? Right? If I just looked at the 50 seconds at the bottom, I might get depressed if there was another guy at the track who did a 48-second run. Right? But if I looked at the times and I go, okay, this was my start split, this was the first part of the track, this was the second part of the track. Some tracks you get a split for every curve, which is ridiculous. But what they would tell me is like, oh, I was good to this point, and then I had that mistake, and then I lost that time, and then I did that section well. I had good velocity. You got to break it down to give your athlete more metrics to feel good about, other than just the main metric that they're chasing. Okay, so that's super important. Give your athlete metrics that make them feel good about where they're at and what they're doing, and not just on the end result. Because if you're only focused on the end result, I can guarantee you this, your athlete is going to not progress, they're going to regress, right? And then you're going to have to build them back up anyway. So if you build in those little regression points, those distraction points, sometimes if you got a team, if you're in a team environment, the team is just worn out, sometimes the best thing to do with that team is not do another practice, is take them to the movies, right? Right? Go do something that's completely different, and they're going to come back fresher and fresher and fresher. Okay? So listen, thanks everybody for joining me today. If you liked what I had to say, do me a favor, leave me a like and a thumbs up and a heart and all that good stuff. Leave me a comment. Facebook loves that. Please, if you got an athlete who would be a good fit, they've got big dreams, invite them to the group. And by all means, we've launched the podcast based on this group. So if you head on over to iTunes, the Raising High Performing Athletes podcast with Jonathan Edwards, you'll find it there. So I really appreciate that. So thanks for watching, everybody. And if you got any questions, you can email me, coachedwards@athletespecific.com. I'll see you next week. Cheers. All right, everybody, let's really lock this in and take it to the next level. Here's 4 steps you can take right now to make this information stick so that you get the most out of it. Number 1, come join our Facebook group, Creating High Performance Athletes. In there, you can connect with me as well as other athletes, parents, and coaches who support one another from a variety of sports. You can even submit questions to be answered in future episodes. You can do this and we can help. Be sure to join today. The link is in the show notes. Number 2, share this episode with someone you know and post it to your social media accounts. It helps us spread the message that all athletes have more of a chance to make their dreams happen than they probably think they do. All athletes deal with self-doubt, and I'm here to make sure we get rid of that. And be sure to tag me so we can give you credit. I'm at Olympic Jonathan on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So that's at Olympic Jonathan, JONATHAN. Number 3, subscribe to us on iTunes so you never miss an episode, and leave a review telling us what your biggest takeaway was from this episode. If you've already left a review, feel free to leave another one because it helps us get this message out there even more. We really appreciate that. Number 4, teach. Teach these concepts I spoke about in this episode to someone who needs to hear it, whether that's another athlete, a parent, or a coach. When we teach what we know to someone else, it helps us to understand, and when we understand, we can apply this information for our own good so we can perform at a higher level, and that's the whole reason you're here. So thanks for listening, everybody, and remember, this athletic dream has fallen on you for a reason. It's fallen onto you or your house or your kids or your coaches. It doesn't matter. It's fallen on you for a reason. You can do this. We can help. See you in the next episode.